Now we're going to go into, I'm going to give you a brief background on integral theory. Who's familiar already with integral theory? I know Nikki and Peter. Anyone else? A little bit?
No, what's the name?
Integral. Yeah. So what I'm doing now is I'm kind of putting the foundations down. So integral theory is a highly complex theory. I'm going to give you the high-level overview of integral theory. And the reason that this is important is integral theory is a way that we as humans see and engage with the world. And so it's worldviews. Instead of a, who's ever had like the assessments, the DISC or Enneagram or whatever else like that? Who's ever had any of those assessments? Yeah, well that's kind of like a personality typing. Integral theory is looking at us from the way we see the world, the way we engage in the world. And the term integral was coined by Ken Wilber, who's still alive as a sort of a preeminent philosopher. But what he did was he combined the thinking of multiple people. So what he did was he created all of these theorists, and he put all out on the floor, applying synergy and going, where's the map that covers the whole? And that's how integral theory occurred. And there are a couple of really critical elements in this. There's a lot of complexity behind it, but really critical elements that are incredibly useful to apply both to day-to-day interaction and also how we see the world, but how we manage people, all of that sort of stuff. So it's very practical. And the first part of integral theory, actually I'm going to use, can I swing over there? Yeah. The first part of integral theory is the quadrants. And so the interior and the exterior of the individual and the collective. So it's the interior and the exterior of the individual and the collective. I'm going to go through this. I'm going to explain it so that it makes sense. And as I said, I'm giving you the really high-level overview. So the interior of you. You're sitting there, and I can make some assessments about who you are and what you're doing as people based on how you're dressing and presenting in the exterior world. But the truth is, I have no friggin' idea what you're thinking. Or your value system. I could potentially, make assessments. So the interior of the individual is our values and beliefs. What we do as humans is we take our values and beliefs and then we put them into the exterior world as behaviours and actions. Habits, actions. But we don't do that in isolation of context of the we space, which is the community and custom and culture. Culture. I have to warn you that I get very creative with my spelling when I'm in front of people. And we can't do that. The exterior of the we space is systems and structures. So the exterior is measurable. The interior is hard to measure. It's intrinsic. It's hard to measure. What we're going through at the moment is a world where there's such a huge focus on the measurable. If you can't measure it doesn't exist. Well, that denies half of our experience, essentially. So let me give you a really simple example of how this exists in everything. I'm making an absolute statement. In everything. And then I'll give you some really practical ways to use this that'll make a difference. You have an interior thought. So it's just a thought. If we had electrodes on your brain, science could register that you had a thought, but they couldn't register the content of the thought. So you have an interior thought that you need to go to the milk bar to buy some milk. Means nothing unless you get out of your chair and make a move and do what you need to do. So you have to get out of your chair, you have to get on your bike, put on your shoes, grab your wallet, whatever it is, drive the car to go and do this thing. In order for anyone to go to a milk bar in our day and age to buy some milk, if we mapped how many systems and structures are required, everything from there's a cow, and there's someone who milks the cow and the delivery of the cow, so we've got the milk system. We've got the system of the store, all of that. And then we've got the system of, I'm going to give you this, well actually, card that's going to go bleep. It mightn't even bleep anymore. And you're going to give me milk. So we've got the financial system, all of that sort of stuff. So the system to support that single thought is huge and complex. And our action lives in culture and community. So, Kiwis. Any Kiwis? Anyone in the room, Kiwi? Where do you go in Brazil to get milk? The shop.
Wait, what?
Do you call it a milk bar?
No, actually, it's pretty. The third one first. Go to the shop.
Go to the shop. If you were a Kiwi, where would you go to buy milk?
Go to the dairy, bro.
You go to the dairy. Yeah. If you were a Highland tribes person from Papua New Guinea, where would you go?
Cow.
The cow. If you were, in a culture that didn't drink milk, what would you do? You wouldn't have the thought in the first place, would you? It just wouldn't exist. So a simple thought like that lives in the four domains. The complex word for it is tetra arising. So this needs to happen simultaneously.
Did you say tetra?
Tetra. Four. Tetra. T-E-T-R-A. Tetra arising. Four arising. So this happens simultaneously, but we don't think about it. So if we're going back to synergy, we need to think about this as a whole. Good question, how do we apply this? And I'm going to give you some really sort of practical examples. Most of us have we have quadrants that we like to inhabit as a strong place. I spend a lot of my, I'm strong here in the systems and structure thing. There are people that that will be very highly community, culture, relational focused, yes. And there are people who are very much about the exterior behaviour and habits in the world, and people who really hold core values. When I was working with one of the big banks back in the early 2000s, they did a cultural change initiative with McKinsey that was mega millions of dollars. And the CEO at the time, John McFarlane, decided that he needed to spend a lot of energy over here. And so it was good for me because I got a lot of work. But they trained all of the staff, they had meditation rooms, they had, it was a lot of community, culture, values, belief, the human element. Let's take care of the humans. We have humans working at the bank. We want to take care of the humans. And then along came the next CEO, Mike Smith, and he said, screw the humans, where's the money? Show me the money, I want to measure it, I want to be able to see it, I want to be able to taste it, I want to be able to touch it, show me the money, we don't have humans working here. And so as a staff, it was like, we're all loving each other, and then the next minute, no, show me the money. And not only that, but the loss from the bank's point of view, gain to McKinsey and people like myself of the money that was spent. I walked into a branch 2 years after, and I asked the bank manager there, and I said, do you know anything about the breakout program? And she looked at me with glazed eyes. Never heard of it. So that investment. So the point is we need all of them. And sometimes we need to focus on one over the other, but not at the expense of the others. We need all of them. We need to consider the values and beliefs in an organisation. We need to consider the behaviours and habits and the actions in the world. This fundamental piece here is where most of our individual human heartache is. It's the promises you make to yourself that you don't keep in the exterior world. It's the things that you believe in that you don't act on. Making sense? Yeah. When we don't have a community and culture around us that supports us, it happens to animals, it happens to humans, we just can't thrive. And then when we don't have systems and structures that support the very things that we're trying to animate to bring to life, it's never going to work. And so we have to look at, again, the whole system versus any of the parts. What is really valuable with this is that you can use this as a very simple, it's really simple frame of reference, and going, where in what we're doing am I addressing all of these four elements? Where am I addressing the values and beliefs? Where am I looking at the habits and actions? And where is there a dissonance between any of these? Because what we're really looking for, as I said, and I can't draw a spiral here, but it's a tetra-arising spiral coming through like this. Because as we apply this in a field, we're actually getting a higher order of development. It's entropic. This is the first sort of aspect of integral theory. Again, very, very simple. And then the little bit more complex is the stages. No, so the tetra-arising is, I've drawn, in a construct of 4 quadrants,
Yep.
but in actual fact, all 4 of them are arising simultaneously.
Right, are they separate then? Like if this thing comes up,
Yeah.
like, are they all interconnected?
Yes, you can't eliminate or just delete one of these elements. They arise simultaneously. We have, and so if you look at, and this doesn't just apply to individuals, it applies to entities, organisations, and also to cultures. Mm-hmm. So a culture has its particular value set. Have a look at, for instance, the great example of New Zealand right now under the leadership of Jacinda Ardern. They're expressing, or she through her leadership, is expressing a set of values that are backed by habits and actions and behaviours in the world that are evident, supported by and also informing the community and being, again, supported and being informed by the systems and structures that are setting that up. They're co-arising together. They're all coming together. You may go, we're going to really focus on having the values come to life, but they have to come to life. They're nothing unless you do something. They're nothing unless the systems and structures support the doing of that, and they're nothing unless you have community to hold the space for that. Yeah. So this is one element. In integral theory, they have it's called AQUAL, which is all quadrants, all levels, all lines, all states. I'm just going to do, that's the quadrants, and I'm just going to give you an overview of the levels of development, stages of development. And this is, at the moment, I'm talking specifically about adult human development, but it's also nation, how countries develop, so communities develop. It's not isolated just to the individual. And so what happens is all of us start needing to be taken care of. So we start with survival. That is the fundamental beginning. Humans have a particular high need for it. We absolutely need to have care taken for a significant period of time. So what I'm going to do in these stages, just like we can use centimetres or we can use inches or we can use something else, the measurement itself in stages is arbitrary, but the the ones that I'm going to give you here is kind of like a standard construct, but it is arbitrary, and there are simpler versions of this. So we start with survival. The next stage is, I'm going to call it magic mythic. So who has children? Do you have children, Rebel?
I've got stepchildren.
Sorry?
I've got stepchildren.
Stepchildren, okay. I know you have children. No?
Not that I know of.
Not that Ty's about to become a dad. Yeah. Who knows children? Children, we go through a stage, where there is a monster under the bed. Yeah? Can you remember being a child and there was definitely a monster under the bed, or in the cupboard, or in the garden, or somewhere? There was a monster. Well, there were fairies in the garden. Or, Disney. Why does it? Because they're appealing to this. You can't argue with it. It's in actual fact, it's part of our developmental stage. And so the magic mythic stage is actually a really healthy stage. And a couple of key elements about this. There is a positive and negative to every single stage. So there's a good element of it and there's a not so good element of it. You cannot skip from this stage up to a higher order. You have to actually go do the work. You've got to do the work. You've got to climb the mountain. You don't take the helicopter. So you've got to climb the mountain. You've got to do the work. And in a healthy human, we have elements of all stages. So you don't outgrow and leave behind a stage. You transcend that stage and include ideally the better elements of that stage. So you go to a higher order. So we have magic mythic. And so there are communities in the world. Well, there are communities in the world that this is all they are at now. Potentially communities in Australia where that's where we're all at right now. And when you have this as your main, there's no capacity or space for anything else at all. Because this is what we have to do. A woman trying to feed her starving child has only one thing to do, and that is feed a starving child. Magic mythic is actually an extraordinary stage, but there are communities in the world that are very much entrenched in the magic mythic stage of development. In other words, they haven't sort of transcended above that. And so if you're going into a region where it's a really strong developmental stage, you need to know that this is what you're dealing with. And just as you wouldn't tell your 2-year-old, you're stupid, there's no monster in the cupboard. I mean, you're trying to affirm that there's no monster in the cupboard, but you're not going to say, like, stupid you, hopefully. You're going to go, no, there's not a monster. Let's have a look in the cupboard, and all of that sort of stuff. And so the point is that what we tend to do very easily is we tend to make a person's developmental stage inappropriate. Instead of going, how can I support you to move to the next stage of development? How can we create the environmental conditions that takes you to a higher order? Syntropic. So the stage after this, I'm just going to go egocentric.
Christine, can I ask what the traits or kind of observational...
Yeah.
How would you tell that an individual or an organisation or a community is in the
magic mythic?
phase?
The heavens, the gods, and I'm not saying any of this is wrong because there's an appropriateness to it that we've stepped over, indigenous wisdom for so long. So the gods, the heavens, the signs from the seagulls, we need to dance 10 times around, all of that sort of stuff. So those type of components are most of religious dogma lives here in the magic mythic stage. Those type of things express. On the positive side of this, and if you start studying whole culture, like coming back to looking at the whole of culture, and you watch what pop culture is doing, so movies, television, the films, etc., etc. So you look at the time of Lord of the Rings, Lord of the Rings is an entire series around the magic mythic stage of development. Entire. And it, as is Avatar to a degree, it has a higher order because it's going up to the regenerative sort of stage as well. But we are, in our current society, we are so missing this. It's like a drought. We're so missing ritual and the experience of something. You know, it's as simple as the ritual of a sunrise, which most of you know I do a lot. But we're missing the opportunity to be in ritual and be in sort of communion with the spirit world, whatever you want to call it. And so what we need is to satiate our own drought for this is we need the Lord of the Rings and we need these movies that tell these grand mythic stories because we're just missing them. And they're a really essential component to us as being humans.
Does prophecy sit in that space as well?
Yeah, prophecy, you know, all of those type of things. We're evoking a dimensionality. If you just think of like children's development, I know when my daughter was born, she was plugged into some other universe that I definitely didn't have access to. I mean, she was. You could see it. Anyone, you know, you could see it. And I think many children are the same. They're in this realm of existence that we then sort of like shut down. Boom, 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 there's the shutters. And they live in this magic mythic world. I mean, I was entirely in my imagination. There was a whole other realm of existence. I swear to God, I flew when I went to bed at night. Like, I can remember looking at myself on the bed from the ceiling. And that's, you know, not just some idle thing. Who's to say that we don't do that when we're young children? Or adult, yeah, if you carry that forward. And so you know, this is... The more unpacking we do around these stages, the more we realise, you know, the harm and so on that we have in the world. But yeah, we are definitely suffering a lack of magic mythic. I had a long-term client that I worked with who was a senior executive with one of the banks. Smart guy, you know. He knew he went to church, to a Catholic church every Sunday, not for the dogma, but for the ritual. He wanted to go into a space that was designated as sacred and do the rituals and feel in communion to something that was greater than himself. Yeah. So egocentric. We also call this the red stage for obvious reasons. So egocentric, we go from this magic mythic there and then we go into my world. It's mine. That toy is mine. I want it. You can't have it. There is no sharing options available. And so egocentric is that untrammeled, wild, uncontained, but it's also incredible creativity. It's Murray when he's going off. It is, you know, it's that just like that wild, beautiful creativity. But it's also the very much I, me, mine. I do not see a world that exists outside of I, me, mine. Egocentric. So what I'm trying to say in these stages is that somebody who is at an egocentric stage does not see or engage with the world as there is a we or another. My world, my toy, my rules, my way of doing things, my. They do not have the neurobiological capacity to see the other. We have one of the leaders of the world that's where they are. Aren't we lucky? Like clearly identified at that stage of development. And it's appropriate because we all have to go through that. Anyone ever remember being a terrible tantrum thrower or experiencing the terrible tantrum thrower? You know, this is this stage of development. It's like, it's that. So the next stage is, how will I describe it? black and white. Black and white. So the next stage is structure and conformity and the military and God, code, honour, whatever it is from the Marines, whatever. It's that rules, rigid. There's a structure. There's a way we need to do things. It can only be done in this way. There's a right and a wrong. There's an axis of evil. There's good and bad. There's, yes?
Is it like an us and them as well?
Yes. So a large part of this is that it's ethnocentric. It's my tribe, not your tribe. My tribe is right, your tribe is wrong. My tribe are going to heaven and you're all going to hell. There's a very divided line, good and bad, black and white. And so, yes.
The point is the distinction, right? Like the point is that there's a line.
Yes, yes. But it's also, it's so, positive and negative to each of these. It's also that we need structure and we need regulations. And if we're all doing egocentric driving without any rules and regulations, that's not going to work. It doesn't work. We need to have the structure to contain this. And so if you're looking at human development and you're going, you have got someone who's in this egocentric, they can only see the world in the way of the I, then what we need to do is how do we get them from that into a structure that instead of it being this wild, untammeled, if we go to the driver, there's no road rules, there's no speed limits, there's no this, that, or the other. We put a set of rules and conditions around them and say this is the way the world works. So that's just a simple application of this. It's all going to make sense in a minute because we're moving up. And so the next one is the achiever. The achiever self. I want my stuff, I want my status, I want my power, I want my money, I want my Mercedes, whatever the hell it is. I want that. So this is the achiever self. And generally how they go is they go from I, a we, an I, a we, an I. So they sort of morph from an individual to a collective, an individual, collective, individual. So the achiever, status, stuff, fame, glory, Insta, followers, all of that sort of stuff, yeah? And then...
So it's like someone's recognised we're playing a game, these are the rules, and then it's like, I want to win the game.
Yeah. I want to win the game, and I want to be the king of the mountain, and I want to build an empire, and I want to do all of that sort of stuff. Yeah. And then the last one in this level is I'm just going to call it green because that works. And then I'm going to show you how this all sort of works together. So we go from I want my stuff to oops. My stuff comes at the cost of somebody else, comes at the cost of community, comes at the cost of the earth, etc. And so the green stage of development is but it's egalitarian, it's consensus, it's the rise of feminism, it's LGBT rights, the environment, all of these things happen as a result of developing up into this level of development. The point is that someone who is centered here cannot have access to these higher stages of development. We have to climb the mountain. We've got to go through the stages. And so where, of course, it gets really complex is that we inhabit a world where all of these exist simultaneously and often under one roof. And so, yeah. So we can't go from here to here. You've got to climb the mountain. But you can jump down that mountain bloody fast. So if there was a loud explosion, like a very loud explosion over there, we're all gone back there like quick smart.
And then we start
Some
asking,
people may
was
pray.
that God?
Yeah.
It's door here.
Yeah. And so if you, some of you may not recall this, but it was incredibly obvious that the day after 9/11, most of the Western society that we live in at the moment is at this stage of development, the achiever stage, as was the US. At the time of 9/11, it was led by a axis of evil, good and bad, black and white president, George Bush. The day after 9/11, the entire nation went down to this, to hardcore patriotism. You could not say a single negative word about anyone in the United States. It just dropped immediately into this stage of development. So the biggest tussle that we've got going on in the the Western world is between these two stages. And statistically, about 20% of the population are in the transition from here to here in the Western world. If we look at the whole universe together, 70% is at this stage or below. So if you're considering democracy, for example, where one person, one vote, do you want to consider democracy for the whole planet when this is the worldview of most of the population? And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that from a developmental point of view, we're going to end up with a very unattractive world. And so, this is where complexity builds into the questions of things like democracy and et cetera, So if, what happened in Iraq to impose a democracy on a nation state that hadn't got to the level that democracy could exist was a wrong strategy. If you look at Lee Kuan Yew, who was the amazing leader behind Singapore, Singapore hasn't got resources. It's a little island in the middle of nowhere. And Lee Kuan Yew, within Singapore, there were 5 ethnocentric groups that were, there on this tiny little island with no resources. So ethnocentric here, my tribe, my people, my this. What he did, which was extraordinary, is he recognised he had a tiny community, like a tiny squeezed everyone all in one place, 5 ethnocentric groups, and he needed to manage this community. And so he gave every single ethnocentric group a public holiday that everyone shared. It's not just a public holiday for this group, it's a public holiday for the entire island. So recognising that there were this level of diversity. And then the next thing, which some people will go, how can you know that's wrong, is he put the young people in military service, compulsory. Because this egocentric, wild, untammeled, in a multicultural, ethnocentric community, without having the ability to learn structure and boundaries, would be a mess.
It's awesome.
Yeah. So, but if you look at this, but then if we're going back to enterprise design, like these models, see the thing about models that are true, that's what Bucky called the generalized principles, true in all cases, like all cases. And I've qualified that, and I'm only qualifying it in the moment because I'm still in the conversation. Perhaps not true once we get past the Earth's atmosphere, I don't know, I haven't been there. Perhaps not true there. And perhaps not true in the level of quantum field. I don't know much about that one either. So, but in the space that we inhabit, these are generalized principles. They're true in all cases. So what that means is you can apply them, or like if you're not applying them to everything, then we're just doing what we as humans have done, which is gone, we've got all the answers, and we'll just do whatever we think is right because we're the, king of the earth, which is clearly and patently not true. We don't have dominion and all of that sort of stuff. We're in partnership. And so, but if you have a look at this, applying in all cases, a business, handle survival, tick. make sure that there is ritual and some form of connectivity to something that gives people a meaning and a purpose. Enable the creativity to be allowed there. If you really force down creativity, people just die. We need to have that. We need to have that space of being creative. But we don't want to do it where we're going to harm other people. It has to have good systems and structures and rules and regulations. You have to have a place for people to be superstars. And you have to take care of each other, the community, diversity, the environment, all of that sort of stuff. That's just good business practice. Yeah? And then
QA earlier, all quadrants,
all quadrants, all levels, all lines, all states. There's a lot more complexity behind this. So in most organisations, so this is how, like, if you look at, take Christine for example, handle survival. How do I express my own magic mythic? How do I express my egocentricity? Because we have parts of all of these. If we're, at a higher state, what are the systems and structures that I have in place? How do I get to shine, whatever, be it, and consider the community, the whole, the world, the environment. So a healthy human has all of these. Of course, none of us are pure in our healthiness, and so we have elements of the levels that are not particularly positive and so on. But that's part of just our own development. Because my core belief is that humanity is on a pattern of emergence. So there's and when you add all of these things together and look at, we are ideally progressing slowly and steadily to a higher order. So because we all start at the bottom and we've all got to climb the mountain, there's always going to be people, children, young people, all of that sort of stuff that are going to be lower down the mountain. And so this is where, if you're a leader of an organisation, you need to know that you got all of this. And you may have somebody who's generally functioning at here or here and is actually functioning here because of their circumstances. Yeah, and so the reason this is so important is when we're designing systems for people, we've got to take these things into account. So, one of the things I remind myself is that you don't say to your 5-year-old, I want you to go and run ANZ Bank.
We're not supposed to say that.
Because we have a deep appreciation that the 5-year-old is going through a developmental stage. So we're not expecting the 5-year-old to be able to do complexity. But the interesting thing is that we reach a certain age, I don't know when it is, but it's like I expect all humans to be able to do complexity. And I'm expecting all of you to be, at the same developmental level. Like, where did that happen? That we give children the privilege of growing up and we're not extending the privilege to adults to grow up as well. But from a leadership perspective, what that means is we have to really we have to be aware, who are you dealing with? And bearing in mind that it's complex because generally the way it works is we're centred at a particular level of development, but we flip in and out. As I said, you can if you're centred here and you're starting to smell out green, you can sense that in somebody. But the predominance of their behaviour is going to be here with flavours of the rest. And so the real powerful question that we want to ask is how do we create the environment and so on that enables the people in that, to come back to synergy, in that to be able to collectively become greater. What's the pathway for that? How do we design that? How do we think about that? Well, there's another level. There's other levels. Okay. Haven't finished.
That's good, actually.
Yeah.
What does green mean?
So green. If you're centered at green, and this is where it gets really interesting because a lot of the green movement is actually red in green clothing. Yep. Don't do this. Let me give you the best example, actually. We don't tend to do this very often anymore. But if you're protesting something, if there's well, it's been happening in Hong Kong. If we went out on the streets of Hong Kong and said, "Why are you here protesting?" And this is the question that we really need to ask: Why? Why are you doing this? You're going to get everything from and you'll get all of these colours. You'll get the colours of because nobody tells me what to do. Boom. And you're going to get because I want to be able to make my own way in life. You know, and so you're going to get all of the colours when you ask that question. A lot of times in that hardcore green movement there is a really heavy egocentric view behind it. And so red dressed in green clothing.
And that's where we get, say, passionate vegan supporters turning up to say a farmer is doing like this is an example of someone doing something wrong because of the way we see it rather than
they're imposing
right.
So essentially, you know, what's happening through this is that we're moving, and the really simple way of looking at this is if we're at a 20-floor building, our world, because this is our worldview, it's how we see the world. If we're on the basement level, we can see, you know, what we see out there on the ground. If you go up to level 5, you've got a different perspective. Go up to 10, another different perspective. If you go up to 20, you've got another different. The view is the same. Essentially, you know, what you're seeing, you might have access to a little bit more, a little bit less, but your perspective has shifted. And so the developmental sort of here is that we go to the capacity, and it's a neurobiological, psycho-emotional, so it's a whole system's capacity to handle increasing levels of complexity. Just as a 5-year-old we know can't handle a level of complexity yet. Doesn't stop. Doesn't stop when you're 20, it doesn't stop when you're 30, it doesn't stop. Well, it shouldn't. It does stop, but it shouldn't. We should be developing continuously. Some people don't want it to move. They want it to stay where it is. So the final piece, and then we're going to have a break. The final piece of this is that from green, there's kind of a monumental leap, like a big leap. And one of the best ways I can explain this is in the storytelling experience. When I was back in the 90s, I had the good fortune of spending 7 days on Kona, the big island of Hawaii, studying Bucky Fuller's work. And present in the room was Amy, who wrote this book, who was his protege for the last 3 years, people who had worked and knew him very well. And so what we did, we were working through 21 hours of recorded video, which you can now access online for free. And we're working through that as a collective. And for the first 2 days, so there were about 100 people in this event, including people who really knew his work. The first 2 days, 100% of us were struggling with narcolepsy. Do you know what narcolepsy is? It's where you're sitting there and there is nothing you can do to stay conscious. It's like you're just dropping, like trying to stay, like really, trying to stay awake. Yeah, you know, those times when you're driving and you go, I need to stop, because there's nothing you can do to stop from falling asleep. That, 100% of the room was suffering from that. It was an extraordinary experience. We had the temperature down to like, we had music going, we were sitting, I was sitting on my foot trying to hurt myself. So it was extraordinary experience because we were taking in, it's really the whole room. We were taking in this very complex but very high caliber thinking that required a complete reordering of how we enact and engage in the world. And because it was happening over a very short period of time. And then somewhere around the second day, I can't remember the time frame, but something shifted and we all just made this jump. And so, a lived experience of that, we all made the jump. And that may not mean that we made this jump, but it meant that I made the jump where I can read this stuff and not fall asleep. I can actually read it and it makes sense to me. We made the jump. And so from green to second tier in integral is, classically known as a leap. There's a leap. And it really is a leap in, it's kind of like when the Renaissance occurred, there was only 500 people essentially that created the whole Renaissance, which went from the Dark Ages to the what we know as the Renaissance, where science came in and all of that sort of stuff. And so it doesn't require a huge amount of people. But second tier, the first stage of second tier, I'm just going to call it for now teal. The essential features of teal is that you recognise and appreciate that there are complexities like all the stages below you, and you're designing systems to handle complexity. So you're thinking about the whole systems design. A large part of teal is there's an absence of fear. So you lose the fear of survival. So you kind of tune into a higher frequency of how Earth and universe sort of works. And obviously you can handle much higher orders of complex thinking. Multiple perspectives simultaneously is kind of that. It doesn't end there because human development doesn't end. So there's we believe about 5% of the population are moving into a teal space, and statistically it's said that only 10% is ever required to get that cultural leap, a renaissance, a second renaissance, yeah. Oh, it's pain. It's like the chrysalis. It's an emergent experience.
It's not something you actively do. It's something that say you're falling backwards through an open door, and as soon as you think you're taking a step, you're actually dropping. Yes, that's that really fascinating.
Yeah, it is, and that's why I said that I told you about the Bucky Fuller experience, neurobiological. There was something that had to change in our physical, emotional, spiritual capacity to organise and structure thinking, and it had to change in order for us to access that. And
do you know what changed?
Do I know what changed?
Yeah. Do you know what helped to make that?
No? It was
beer.
No, because I'll share with you, and then we'll have the break, because you're right on the point here. I'll share with you the principle of perturbation. Okay, so, but let me come to that in just a second, because I've got to get this finished. So this is, we are constantly evolving, but the good news is that there is the capacity for a higher order of intelligence. My sort of analogy of this is back in the time of the writing of the US Constitution, which 200 years ago was written by a group of men, unfortunately, but I'm sure they got advice from their wives. I hope they got advice from their wives. But if you look at that document, for the conditions that the country was in at the time, where all the divided states and et cetera, so they created a document that was at a higher order of the standard level of thinking. And so the synergistic principle was applied there. They had a higher order of thinking. They were working as a collective. But of course now time has caught up. And what is needed is another level of that. And what I think most humans really sense on the planet right now is we're absent this type of leadership. All we're seeing is the cat fight on the streets. Yeah, and so, but the good news is that this is emerging, and that there are people that are really thinking about this and in that sort of space, and that it doesn't take many more people to reach that type of altitude, and the entire world will shift.